In a last-ditch effort, Anya confided in her best friend, Lena, a resourceful and fiercely loyal woman who worked as a personal assistant for a high-end recruitment agency. Lena listened with a rare, quiet intensity, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a look of grave concern. The next morning, Anya awoke to a strange silence. There were no new supplies to prepare, no orders for the day's bland meals. The house, usually a hive of cold perfection, was utterly still. Anya, confused and apprehensive, made her way to the kitchen, where she found the small, worn recipe book sitting on the counter. Her heart sank. They had found it, and now they knew her secret. She braced herself for the worst, for the inevitable firing, for the final act of their disdain. The aroma of simmering broth, of freshly chopped garlic and ginger, was Anya's world. It was a world she'd inherited, a legacy lovingly passed down from her grandmother, to her mother, and now to her. Her small restaurant, a humble storefront tucked away on a forgotten street, was a sanctuary of flavor. The sign above the door, hand-painted and faded, simply read, Anya's Kitchen, a testament to its singular, heartfelt purpose. Every morning, she would arrive before the sun, tying a crisp apron around her waist and breathing in the scent of possibility. She kneaded dough with calloused, practiced hands, sliced vegetables with the precision of a surgeon, and stirred her pots with a devotion that transcended mere labor. Her food wasn't just sustenance, it was a story, a memory, a piece of her soul offered on a plate. But instead of a confrontation, she was met with a different kind of silence. The Harrisons had left for the day, a note from the housekeeper explaining that they had an urgent business matter to attend to. Unbeknownst to Anya, they were on a frantic quest, an investigation into her life that would lead them to a shocking, decades-old truth. But the world outside her sanctuary was a harsh, unforgiving place. The street, once a bustling hub of commerce, had fallen silent as gleaming new restaurants opened their doors in the city center. The once loyal customers were now a distant memory, replaced by a painful, echoing emptiness. The bills piled up on the counter, a growing monument to her quiet desperation. Her mother, who had been the heart of the kitchen before a sudden, debilitating illness, was now confined to a small room upstairs. Her medical expenses a crushing weight on Anya's young shoulders. The restaurant, her family's pride and joy, was on the brink of closure. The thought of selling her grandmother's recipes, of letting go of the one thing that connected her to her past, was a knife to her heart. She was fighting a losing battle, a lone soldier defending a fortress with crumbling walls. They started with her family name. They had their corporate investigators dig into the public records, the family trees, and the old business files of her small, failing restaurant. The pieces began to connect with an alarming speed. They discovered that her grandmother, a woman named Ilara, had been a renowned chef in the city's high-end culinary scene. And then they found a small, almost forgotten detail in the old family records, a personal note from Mr. Harrison's late father, a note of deep gratitude to a chef who had been his family's private cook for many years. That chef's name was Ilara, Anya's grandmother. Miles away, in a world of stark contrasts and silent opulence, lived Mr. Harrison and his son, Ethan. Their lives were an intricate tapestry of cold, calculated precision. The Harrison Group, a monolithic corporation that dominated the pharmaceutical industry, was their kingdom. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, was a man carved from marble, his face, a mask of unyielding authority, his eyes, a pair of ice blue chips that missed nothing. He had built his empire on logic and efficiency, a stark and unwavering contrast to the messy, emotional world of his past. The discovery was a physical blow. Their mother and wife, the heart of their home, had been a devoted friend of Anya's grandmother. The recipes, the flavors, the shared love of food, it all made sense. The warmth and joy they had associated with their late mother's kitchen was, in part, a memory of Anya's grandmother's cooking. The two families had been intertwined, their lives a beautiful tapestry of friendship and shared passions, before a mysterious tragedy had torn them apart. For years, the Harrison household had been a tomb of silence, a place where joy was a ghost and laughter was a distant echo. The reason for their emotional barrenness was a tragedy that had shattered their family a decade ago, the sudden death of Mrs. Harrison, a woman who had been the heart and warmth of their home. She was not just a loving wife and mother, she was a talented chef, a woman whose meals were a love letter to her family. Her death had not just broken their hearts, but had also killed their appetite for life and for food. Since then, they had employed a succession of top chefs, each one a master of their craft. Yet none could replicate the taste of her cooking. The sterile, flavorless meals they ate were a form of penance, a daily reminder of the void she had left behind. Food was no longer a joy, but a necessity, a bland, perfunctory chore. Ethan, poring over the documents, finally made the connection. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "Look at this. The year Mom. The year she passed, Anya's grandmother also vanished from the public eye. Her restaurant, a tiny place on the same street where Anya's is, was mysteriously shut down. It all happened at the same time. One afternoon, as Anya was returning from the market, her arms laden with fresh produce, she stumbled. A bag of heirloom tomatoes burst open, their crimson juice splattering across the pristine white shoes of a man stepping out of a gleaming black sedan. That man was Ethan Harrison, the scion of the Harrison Empire. He was every bit his father's son, handsome in a chiseled, emotionless way, with eyes that regarded her as if she were a piece of dirt on his shoe. Mr. Harrison's face was a mask of cold fury. The emotional pain had now given way to a terrifying, logical conclusion. This was not a coincidence. Their families were connected by a tragedy, a past that had been buried under a mountain of lies. And Anya, the girl they had so casually dismissed, was not just the granddaughter of the woman they had revered. She was the key to a truth that would expose a decades-old deception, a truth that promised not just redemption, but a brutal, final justice for all those who had been wronged. Their cold contempt had given way to a burning regret, and their blind hatred was about to be replaced by a furious, all-consuming need to make things right. "Watch where you're going," he said, his voice as cold and sterile as his expression. The Harrisons' frantic search had unearthed a profound and painful truth, but it was only the first layer of a buried secret. Their contempt for Anya, they now realized, was a bitter fruit born from a seed of betrayal planted decades ago. The coldness they had shown her was a reflection of the coldness they had unknowingly adopted after their own family was fractured by a lie. But they knew there was more. The pieces of the puzzle were too perfectly aligned to be a mere coincidence. The simultaneous disappearance of Anya's grandmother and the death of their mother. The mysterious closure of the restaurant there was a puppeteer pulling the strings. Anya, mortified, scrambled to pick up the tomatoes. "I'm so sorry. Sir, I wasn't looking." Their corporate investigators, now working with a new, urgent focus, delved deeper. They weren't just looking for connections, they were looking for a motive. They sifted through old financial records, long-forgotten employee files, and business partnerships that had been dissolved in the wake of the tragedy. Their quest for the truth led them to an old name, a name that was still a fixture in their lives. Mr. Finch, their longtime business partner. Her apology seemed to infuriate him further. He took a single, disdainful look at her flour-dusted clothes, her worn sneakers, and the remnants of the tomatoes. "Pathetic," he muttered under his breath, stepping back into his car without so much as a second glance. The car pulled away, leaving Anya to stare after it, a feeling of deep humiliation burning in her chest. Mr. Finch was a man who had always been there, a silent, trusted pillar of the Harrison Group. He was the one who had offered his condolences, the one who had comforted them in their grief, and the one who had stood by Mr. Harrison's side as he rebuilt his empire. He was a friend, a confidant, a man they trusted implicitly. The thought of him being involved was unthinkable. Later that same day, Mr. Harrison was being driven through the city, his mind lost in a world of stocks and market shares. The car slowed as it passed a small, rustic restaurant. The simple, heartfelt sign, Anya's Kitchen, caught his eye. He saw a young woman, the same one Ethan had encountered earlier, through the window, her face flushed with a tired but determined passion as she stirred a large pot. Her clothes were simple, her restaurant modest, and something about the scene, something about the visible love she put into her work, filled him with a powerful, inexplicable sense of disdain. He had no time for such trivial, emotional pursuits. In his world, success was measured in numbers, not in the sentimental steam of a kitchen pot. He dismissed her from his mind, a fleeting, insignificant image of a woman who was a world away from his own. But the evidence, cold and irrefutable, began to mount against him. The investigators found old records, carefully hidden in a forgotten archive, that detailed a series of covert meetings between Mr. Finch and a disgruntled former employee of the Harrison household. The employee's testimony, long since buried, spoke of a meticulously planned act of sabotage. Mr. Finch, consumed by jealousy over the close bond between the Harrisons and Anya's grandmother, Alara, had orchestrated a plot to frame her. He had planted a series of expensive heirlooms in her belongings, then tipped off the police, leading to a humiliating and false accusation of theft. That chance encounter, a momentary intersection of two disparate worlds, had left its mark. For the Harrisons, Anya was a symbol of everything they had chosen to leave behind: the emotional messiness, the struggle, the sentimental nostalgia of a life they had replaced with cold, hard logic. Their disdain for her was immediate, born not of a specific grievance, but of a deep-seated prejudice against her way of life. They saw her as a reflection of a past they had buried, a reminder of a vulnerability they had long since tried to forget. They had no idea that this humble chef, the girl they had so casually dismissed, would one day hold the key to their past and their redemption. The stage was set, and the taste of contempt was about to give way to a taste of something far more profound. The discovery was a physical blow to both Mr. Harrison and Ethan. The woman they had adored, the woman who had been a second mother to Ethan and a beloved friend to Mrs. Harrison, had been driven away by a cruel and baseless lie. The grief they had carried for a decade was not just for their mother, but also for the loss of a second family, a loss they had never even known they suffered. The coldness and suspicion they had shown to others, the walls they had built around their hearts, were a direct result of this deep-seated betrayal, and the man who had comforted them in their grief was the very person who had caused it. The disdainful glance from Ethan Harrison was a small, sharp pinprick, but the growing mountain of debt was a sword hanging over Anya's head. Her world, once filled with the rhythmic symphony of a busy kitchen, was now haunted by the silence of empty tables and the ominous rustle of overdue bills. Each day brought a new, heavier weight, a new reason to despair. Her mother, once so vibrant and full of life, now lay in a small, sterile room upstairs, her medical bills a testament to the family's crumbling finances. The doctors had been clear: without a significant infusion of cash, her mother's care would be compromised. The thought of losing both her mother and her family's legacy was a double-edged sword that cut deep into Anya's heart. She was a fighter, but she was running out of strength, and more importantly, running out of time. The full truth was now in the light, a horrifying tapestry of jealousy, deceit, and long-held secrets. Mr. Finch had not just framed Alara, he had been systematically undermining the Harrison family's trust in others, sowing seeds of doubt and suspicion wherever he could. He had isolated them, making them dependent on him, all for his own personal gain. He had stolen their joy, their family, and their emotional connection to the world, leaving them with nothing but their cold, calculated empire. "Anya, I know a job," Lena said, her voice low and serious. "The pay is astronomical. They need a live-in chef for a private family. The last few didn't work out, and they're desperate. It's a huge commitment, but it would solve all your problems. For now, at least." The Harrisons' regret was now a burning, all-consuming fury. They had not only been cruel to Anya, but they had been blind fools, living in a gilded cage of their own making, all while the man who had betrayed them for decades stood by their side, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Their mission, once a simple quest for truth, had now become a fierce and unwavering quest for justice. They were not just going to expose Mr. Finch's past, they were going to dismantle his future. And they would do it for Anya, for her grandmother, and for their own family, who had suffered in silence for far too long. The offer was a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Anya hesitated, her mind swirling with the prospect of leaving her mother and her beloved restaurant behind, even for a short time. But the image of her mother's frail hand and the stark reality of the unpaid bills were a cold slap of reality. This wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. The air in the Harrison Group's main boardroom was as cold and still as a winter night. The polished mahogany table reflected the sterile glow of the overhead lights, and the faces of the board members were a gallery of stony resolve. A meeting, ostensibly to discuss the quarter's financial performance, was in full swing. Mr. Finch, a man in his 60s with a silver fox demeanor and an air of quiet authority, was at the head of the table, presenting a new business strategy with a confident, placid smile. He was a master of his craft, a man who had built his career on being the steady hand, the trusted advisor. "Who are they?" Anya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Then the door swung open, and the silence shattered. "They're a very private, very wealthy family," Lena answered, a note of caution in her tone. "I don't know much about them. To be honest, the client only gave us a few details. But the money, Anya, it's more than you could make in a year at the restaurant. It's a chance to save everything." Mr. Harrison and Ethan walked in, their faces grim and unyielding. They were not alone. By their side was Anya, dressed not in her kitchen uniform, but in a smart, elegant dress that spoke of quiet defiance. Her posture was straight, her chin was up, and her eyes, usually so full of warmth, now held a cool, determined fire. With a heavy heart, Anya agreed. She packed a small bag, leaving behind her mother in the care of a kind neighbor and her heart in the hands of her fading restaurant. The car that came to pick her up was a gleaming black sedan, the same kind that Ethan Harrison had been in, and a familiar sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just a coincidence. A ripple of shock went through the room. Board members exchanged confused glances. This was not the CEO they were used to. This was a man on a mission. And who was this young woman they had brought with them? The drive was long, winding through the city's pristine, manicured suburbs until it finally stopped in front of a monolithic iron gate. The car pulled into a sprawling estate, a modern architectural marvel of cold glass and sharp angles. It was a place that exuded power and precision, a world away from the warm, chaotic charm of her family's restaurant. A towering figure stood at the front door, his face a stern mask, his posture rigid and unyielding. The moment Anya's eyes met his, a sickening sense of déjà vu washed over her. It was Mr. Harrison, the man from the street, the CEO of the Harrison Group. Mr. Finch's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but his composure was ironclad. "Mr. Harrison, Ethan, I'm glad you could join us. We were just discussing the future of the company. You're the new chef," he asked, his voice cold and filled with a familiar, deep-seated disdain. "Come in. Don't touch anything. The future of this company is not what we're here to discuss." "Finch," Mr. Harrison said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the room's full attention. "We're here to discuss its past." Anya, her heart now a frantic drum against her ribs, walked into a house that felt more like a museum than a home. The silence was palpable, a heavy presence that seemed to swallow all sound. The walls were adorned with modern art. The furniture was sleek and sterile, and there was no trace of warmth or personality. It was a house built on money, not on love. She was given a brief tour of the kitchen, a gleaming state-of-the-art space that felt utterly devoid of life. It was a magnificent tool, but it had no soul. He looked directly at Anya, and his gaze, once so full of disdain, was now brimming with a deep, heart-wrenching regret. He turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, for years, we have been living a lie that has cost my family our happiness, our trust, and our very soul. And the woman who was a central part of that lie is sitting right here." He gestured towards Anya, his voice trembling with emotion. Later that evening, as she was preparing a simple meal, a young man entered the kitchen. He was tall, handsome, and carried himself with an air of inherited arrogance. He took one look at her, at her tired face and her simple, practical clothes, and his lip curled in a sneer of pure contempt. It was Ethan Harrison, the man from the market, the very person who had called her pathetic. Anya flinched. She didn't understand. She thought they had come here to expose Mr. Finch, not to humiliate her. "You," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're the new chef. My father must be losing his mind. We need a professional, not some street-side cook." But Mr. Harrison wasn't done. He looked at Anya, his eyes filled with a new kind of intensity. "Anya," he said, his voice a quiet, public apology. "We have been cold. We have been cruel. We have treated you with a contempt that you did not deserve. We believed a lie that was fed to us by a man who betrayed our family and your grandmother for decades. We are so sorry." Anya's cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and fury. "I am a professional, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm a chef." The words hung in the air, a shocking confession that left the entire room speechless. Mr. Finch's face was a mask of cold fury, his betrayal now out in the open. "A chef of what?" he scoffed, gesturing around the magnificent kitchen. "Do you even know how to use half of this equipment?" Ethan then stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Mr. Finch. Anya's grandmother, Ilara, was not a thief. She was our family's private chef, a woman we loved and respected. Mr. E. Finch, consumed by jealousy and greed, framed her for theft, driving her away and fracturing our family. He then lied to us, telling us she was a thief, and in doing so, he stole our joy, our trust, and our emotional connection to the world. The verbal assault was brutal, a confirmation of her worst fears. They hated her, not for any specific reason, but for who she was, for where she came from. They saw her as a reflection of a life they had rejected, a life filled with emotional messiness and honest, physical labor. But Anya was a fighter, and she would not let them break her. She had a goal, a purpose far greater than her own pride. She was there to earn money, to save her family, and to keep her promise to her mother. She would endure their contempt, their coldness, and their cruel words. She would be a ghost in their house, a silent, dutiful presence, until her job was done. Unbeknownst to her, she was not just entering a house of wealth, but a house of secrets. And she was about to become the key to a truth that would shake their family to its very core. Ethan's eyes, once so cold and dismissive, were now burning with a righteous anger. He looked at Anya and then back at the room. The contempt we showed Anya was a direct result of that lie. We saw in her what we thought we had lost: the warmth, the heart, the soul of our kitchen, and we pushed her away, just as we had pushed away a part of ourselves. The Harrison mansion was a cage of glass and steel, and Anya was its silent prisoner. Her days were a blur of cold perfection, preparing meals in a kitchen so immaculate it felt soulless, and serving them to two men who treated her as if she were a ghost. Mr. Harrison and Ethan would sit at opposite ends of a long, pristine dining table, eating in a silence that was more chilling than any angry word. They never complimented her food, never made a sound of appreciation, and barely even looked at her. Anya, in her simple uniform, felt the weight of their contempt every single day. She was a professional chef, and they were treating her like a glorified servant. The room was in chaos. Whispers erupted. The board members, many of whom had known Mr. Finch for years, stared at him in horrified disbelief. Mr. Finch, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling, stood up, his face a contorted mask of fury and desperation. Anya quickly learned that her predecessors, a long line of celebrated chefs, had all met the same fate. They had come with grand reputations and left in defeat, unable to crack the impenetrable wall of the Harrisons' indifference. The family only ate bland, simple meals: boiled vegetables, grilled chicken with no seasoning, plain rice. It was food designed for function, not for flavor. It was as if they were deliberately punishing themselves, a penance for a grief they could not escape. Anya, a chef who lived and breathed flavor, found it suffocating. She yearned to cook with spices, to fill the kitchen with the warmth of a simmering sauce, to see a flicker of joy on their faces. "This is madness!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with rage. "This is a pathetic attempt to cover up your own incompetence. This girl, she's a nobody, a street cook." One afternoon, as she was putting away the latest batch of gourmet supplies, she noticed a small, forgotten pantry tucked away in a corner of the massive kitchen. It was dusty and dark, a place where no one had bothered to look in years. Inside, among a collection of discarded pots and pans, was a small, leather-bound notebook. Its pages were yellowed with age, and its cover was worn and faded. It looked old, a relic from a different era, curiosity getting the better of her. Anya opened it, but his protestations were lost. Mr. Harrison, his voice now a steady, unwavering force, revealed a series of documents, projecting them onto a large screen. The documents detailed Mr. Finch's fraudulent transactions, his secret meetings with competitors, and his methodical campaign of sabotage against the Harrison family. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth, so long buried, was finally in the light. The notebook was a collection of handwritten recipes, each one meticulously penned in beautiful, elegant cursive. It was a treasure trove of forgotten flavors, of dishes she had never seen before. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of nutmeg and cinnamon still clung to its pages. As she read through the entries, a strange feeling of familiarity washed over her. The dishes were simple, heartfelt, and full of a love she understood intimately. And then, she saw a small, familiar doodle of a heart next to one of the recipes. It was the same doodle her grandmother used to make in her own recipe book. A shiver ran down her spine. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Mr. Harrison and Ethan had not just come to expose a villain, they had come to apologize to a hero. They had come to tell Anya, in front of the entire company, that she was not just a chef, but the key to their past, their redemption, and their future. The room was no longer a place of corporate strategy, but a courtroom, where justice was finally being served. And Anya, the girl they had so casually dismissed, now stood at the center of it all, a symbol of truth, integrity, and the power of a single heartfelt meal. Anya held the book in her hands, her heart pounding with a mixture of shock and wonder. Her grandmother, the renowned chef who had mysteriously disappeared from the public eye years ago, had once cooked in this very kitchen. This house, this cold and sterile place, held a piece of her family's history, a truth she had never known. The book was a bridge between her past and the Harrisons' present, a silent whisper of a connection she couldn't yet comprehend. The final, chaotic moments of the boardroom meeting left an eerie silence in their wake. The police had escorted Daniel and Clara out, their enraged shouts echoing down the hallway, until they were finally gone. Anya's father, Mr. Kingston, stood trembling, not with fear, but with the profound weight of a past he had never truly understood. He walked over to Liam, his eyes full of a raw, heartfelt apology. Inspired and emboldened by this discovery, Anya made a reckless decision. She would not cook the bland, flavorless food they demanded. She would cook a dish from her grandmother's book, a simple, fragrant stew she knew by heart. It was a gamble, a defiant act against their contempt. She would risk losing her job, losing the money she so desperately needed, all for a chance to inject a little bit of her soul, a little bit of her grandmother's love, into their lives. She wanted to prove to them, and to herself, that food was more than just sustenance. It was a memory, a story, a healing force. As the aroma of the simmering stew began to fill the sterile kitchen, Anya's heart was a mix of fear and fervent hope. She was no longer just a chef. She was a woman on a mission, and the whispers of a forgotten recipe were her only guide. "Arthur's son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "All these years, I never knew. I let his memory be sullied, and I let his betrayer's son into my home, into my family. I am so sorry." The dinner bell chimed, a cold, metallic sound that echoed through the silent halls of the Harrison mansion. Anya, her heart a tangled knot of fear and defiance, carried the 2 bowls of stew to the dining room. The aroma, a warm, fragrant promise of comfort and flavor, wafted through the sterile air, a stark contrast to the bland, clinical atmosphere. She placed the bowls in front of Mr. Harrison and Ethan, her hands trembling slightly, then retreated to the shadows, her eyes fixed on them from a safe distance. This was it, the moment of truth. She braced herself for their anger, for the inevitable condescending remarks about her unprofessional choice. Liam, for the first time, revealed a hint of the pain he had carried. "You were both victims. Mr. Kingston, it's over now." Mr. Harrison and Ethan looked at the dish with suspicion. It was not the tasteless grilled chicken and boiled rice they were used to. The stew was a rich, deep brown, filled with tender chunks of meat and vegetables, and a delicate steam rose from it, carrying a scent that was both familiar and haunting. They hesitated, a silent, unspoken question hanging in the air between them. Finally, Mr. Harrison picked up his spoon, a look of grim resolve on his face. He took a small spoonful, his expression unreadable. Ethan, following his father's lead, took a bite as well. His eyes narrowed in anticipation of disappointment. The 2 men shared a silent, profound moment of reconciliation, a healing of a wound that had festered for decades. Then, Mr. Kingston turned to his daughter, his eyes brimming with pride and love. He had seen her at her lowest, and now he was seeing her at her most powerful. The moment the stew touched their tongues, everything changed. Time seemed to stop. The world, the cold, sterile mansion, the grudging silence, all of it faded into a distant hum. The flavor was a jolt, a powerful, emotional shockwave that traveled from their taste buds to the very core of their being. It was the taste of their childhood. It was the taste of their late mother's kitchen, the warmth of her hugs, the sound of her laughter. It was a ghost, a beautiful, painful memory they had tried to bury for a decade. "Lily," he said, taking her hand, "I was a fool. I should have seen it. But you stood up to them. You saved us all." Mr. Harrison's hand began to tremble, the spoon clattering to the pristine marble floor. His face, usually a mask of unyielding authority, crumpled with an overwhelming wave of emotion. His eyes, the cold, ice-blue chips that had not shed a tear in years, began to glisten. Ethan, equally stunned, felt a lump form in his throat. The flavor was so potent, so real, that he could almost see his mother standing in the kitchen, a gentle smile on her face. A tear, hot and stinging, rolled down his cheek, an emotion he had long since forgotten how to feel. Lily smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that had been absent for too long. "We saved us all. Father, Liam and I. We did it together." Anya watched from the doorway, her fear giving way to a profound sense of confusion. She had expected anger, but she had not expected this. The two men, a moment ago so cold and dismissive, were now a picture of raw, naked grief. The stew, her grandmother's recipe, had unlocked a door in their hearts, a door they had kept firmly shut for a decade, the walls they had built around themselves. The years of cold silence and emotional barrenness all came crashing down with a single spoonful of a simple stew. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and corporate restructuring. With the evidence Liam had provided, the police moved swiftly to freeze Daniel and Clara's assets and open a full investigation into their embezzlement and corporate espionage. The Albright family's empire, built on a foundation of lies and betrayal, began to crumble, its public image in ruins. The justice that had been so long denied was finally being served. "Mr. Harrison," his voice a hoarse whisper, finally broke the silence. How did you make this?" he asked, his eyes filled with unshed tears, finally meeting Anya's. The Kingston Group, however, was in a state of fragile recovery. The board, having witnessed the spectacular takedown of their former leaders, was now in a state of disarray. They looked to Mr. Kingston for leadership, but he, having been so close to his own downfall, was ready to step aside. Anya, still in shock, finally found her voice. "It's a recipe for my family," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "It's a recipe from my grandmother's book. It's your time, Lily," he said to her one evening as they sat in his study. "You showed more courage and intelligence in one day than I have in a lifetime. The company is yours to lead." The name grandmother seemed to hit them both like a physical blow. Their eyes widened with a terrifying realization. Could it be? Could this young woman, this chef they had treated with such contempt, be the granddaughter of the woman who had been the heart of their home, the woman they had lost, and whose memory they had been unknowingly chasing for a decade? And so, Lily, with Liam's unwavering support and guidance, took her rightful place as the new CEO of the Kingston Group. She was no longer just the heiress, she was a leader, a visionary, and a force to be reckoned with. She implemented sweeping changes, focusing on integrity, transparency, and a renewed sense of purpose. The company, under her fierce and compassionate leadership, began to thrive once more. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was no longer a silence of indifference, but a silence of shock, of regret, and of a dawning, terrifying understanding. The food, her simple, heartfelt cooking, had not just brought back a memory, it had opened a Pandora's box of emotions. A ghost from their past they were now forced to confront. The taste of contempt had given way to the taste of a ghost, a flavor that promised not just memories, but a truth that would shake their family to its very core. The strange, desperate marriage had now evolved into something real, something beautiful. Lily and Liam moved into their own home, a place of peace and genuine affection. Their relationship, born from a moment of chaos and deception, was now built on a foundation of unwavering trust, respect, and a love that had weathered the storm. The night was long and filled with a suffocating silence that was a stark contrast to the previous dinner. Mr. Harrison and Ethan had left the table without a word, their faces pale with shock and a profound, dawning regret. They had spent the rest of the evening in the library, a room filled with heavy tomes and the ghosts of their past. The taste of Anya's stew, the flavor of their mother's kitchen, was a haunting presence that refused to leave their minds. It was more than just a dish. It was a key that had unlocked a decade of buried grief and unanswered questions. One night, as they stood on the balcony of their new home, looking at the city lights, Lily leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought, a week ago, I thought my life was over. I was a laughingstock, a broken doll." "It can't be a coincidence," Ethan said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "That taste. It was exactly like Mom's. I haven't tasted that in 10 years. Liam wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You were never broken," he said, his voice a gentle caress. "You were just waiting to be set free. I've loved you for a long time, Lily, and I never stopped believing in you." Mr. Harrison, his face still a mask of pain and disbelief, nodded slowly. "The handwriting," he said, holding up the small, worn recipe book he had found in the kitchen, a book that Anya had left behind in her haste. "The handwriting is hers, your mother's. She kept a small book of her favorite recipes. It's been missing since she left." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. "I love you too, Liam. You saved me. And in a way, I saved you, too. We healed our past together." Ethan's eyes widened. "But Anya said it was her grandmother's book. Her grandmother was a chef, wasn't she?" Their forced marriage had been a moment of desperation, but it had turned out to be a stroke of fate. It had brought together two people who were meant to heal old wounds, to find justice, and to build a new life together. One built not on the ruins of the past, but on the promise of a beautiful and genuine future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. The pieces of the puzzle, so long scattered, were finally beginning to fall into place. The two men, a moment ago so cold and dismissive of Anya, were now consumed by a desperate need for the truth. They needed to know who this woman was and what her connection was to their past. Their contempt for her was gone, replaced by a dawning, terrifying regret. They had been cruel, cold, and dismissive to a young woman who, by some strange twist of fate, was connected to the most cherished person in their lives. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. "We need to find out everything about her," Mr. Harrison said, his voice now filled with a new, urgent resolve. "Her family, her history, everything. This is not a coincidence.